going to talk about quite a bit of things, ultimately starting with who are all these esteemed gentlemen on the stage, why Aptos, price discovery, which I believe is kind of one of the holy grails of blockchains, and then maybe get into some spicy topics as we go through. But maybe to kick it off, I would love you gentlemen each to do a quick introduction to the Aptos community and what you're building.
Sure, I'll start here. Really great to be here. Aptos has just such great vibe and energy, and always been a big fan. Actually, I've been following the Move language since like 2019, 2020. So I'm Josh, I'm a co-founder and CEO at Supra. Supra, formerly known as Supra Oracles. What we're doing today, however, is vertically integrating smart contract platform with oracles, with cross-chain communication, automation, basically the mega monolith.
I'm Alex Kahn. I'm co-founder and CEO of Econia Labs, which has built the flagship Econia protocol. It's a fully on-chain order book on Aptos with atomic settlement, first of its kind on high-throughput chains. I'm also a community contributor to Aptos Core. You can go look on GitHub at my history. I think I've merged like 30 PRs into the CLI mostly. And right now we've been working on a fun consumer product over at Econia Labs called emojicoin.fund that some of you might have engaged with on testnet. I'm excited to talk here today about what the future of finance looks like when we start to do high-performance trading on chain and how the different protocols we're all building can plug into that same shared vision.
Hi, I'm Julian. I started off in traditional finance working at Dear W. Cumberland. And while it was a good experience, what I learned was that the way traditional finance works, it's very centralized and not accessible to most people. And so after I left Dear W, what I really wanted to do was to build a protocol and enable anybody to trade any asset, and also allow people to, instead of having to go through a centralized exchange and settle and trade in USD, allow people to use all sorts of assets, Aptos, USD, yield-bearing stablecoins as collateral to trade. And I think this is really important, especially in blockchain where it's an international market, to enable anybody to trade. And the way we're doing that is through perpetual futures and providing sort of anything with the price feed. We want to allow anybody to trade. That's our vision, and Aptos is the place we decided to do it.
Perfect. Well, great intros, gentlemen. I think we're obviously at the first Aptos experience. There's a lot of people probably in the audience that are excited to learn about Aptos, excited to learn more about blockchains. The industry today is still really centered around the Ethereum virtual machine. The industry believes L2s are going to be the saving grace to really scale adoption. Maybe we get L3s, L10s, and L100s. But you guys have chose to build on Aptos. I'm curious why Aptos instead of any of the other number of protocols, including app chains, that you could have built on.
Well, I'll start here. I mean, look, you don't need layer 3s.
Spicy take.
If you can scale the layer 1, you don't even need layer 2s. Barely. Maybe some use cases for sure. But really the focus should have been on scaling the layer 1. If you think about back in the day, I was in San Francisco going all into blockchain focused on Ethereum. And I focused mostly on trying to scale and understand this like Ethereum. And bottom line is, well, their plan in 2017, 2018 was, I think, 1,064 shards. That was also a bad design, by the way. But then they pivoted to this layer 2 strategy. Guess what? Because of Solana, AVAX, others, high throughput layer 1s, right? Remember, this layer 2 strategy was not part of the original plan. It was an emergency pivot. You guys might not like to hear that, but it's true. And the worst thing is you fracture liquidity. You have fragmented liquidity, and it gets worse with layer 3s. So I think high throughput layer 1s are the future. I think you should do as much as you can to scale the layer 1 itself. Back to EVM versus like Move language. For developers, this is going to be much more secure. We cannot go to global scale without safe programming languages. The engineers, they may not know that they're doing something wrong, but with the Move prover, right, with Move VM, there's just less opportunity to make a mistake. So I think it's very promising.
+1 retweet on the atomic composability. That's why I chose Aptos in particular. There are specific characteristics of the block STM execution environment that Sash was just talking about before this that made it so we can build an order book that's not just fast and on-chain, but also has atomic settlement. And this wasn't possible on Solana previously, which I had been basically working with before Aptos, because you have to trade off either atomic composability versus permissionless market making. So you can either have anyone place a limit order, or the trades can settle in the transaction which are placed, but not both. And because of that limitation of Solana, there was something about the order book design space that really just nagged at me. And when I first learned about Aptos and the block STM execution model, I decided to give it a go. And there was also a vote of confidence that it had been developed by a world-class engineering team at Facebook with essentially bottomless resources. Because if anyone can build a web-scale distributed system, it's Facebook engineers with as much money as Zuck is willing to throw at them, so to speak. In terms of the atomic composability, I think that is really the end game in what the killer app that I view as for blockchains, which is atomic composability in finance. Right now, there's all these fragmented information silos for any kind of different financial instrument in the world lives on a different market. Even some assets are represented in what we think of as wrappers in the crypto world, but they're in some maybe exchange traded fund or some other kind of instrument that only trades or only clears in one part of the world at one time. And unfortunately, this whole T+1 issue that Melton was talking about earlier is just not good enough. We already have T0 settlement in crypto when you have a transaction that settles immediately. And the important part about this is it's not just one sort of data structure or one type of financial primitive. It's any financial primitive. You can chain them together. You can take the input of one transaction, you can put it into the input of another one. You can do this continuously. And it allows for things like immediately refinancing loans using a flash loan, for example. There's sort of advanced techniques that you can do on chain that couldn't be done anywhere else. And what surprised me, I think, most after having been in this industry for almost 3 years at this point is that it is still a hot take that the computers have to be fast and inexpensive to use. I think that it sort of goes without saying in any field of computer science that it needs to be faster and cheaper next year, or otherwise it's going to get outcompeted. And that's what Aptos is doing. It's making it faster, more inexpensive with higher throughput each year. That's built into the DNA of the chain and the engineering team. And that's really the only way to support bringing every financial market in the world on chain, which I think is the end game, and I think is a goal that we should all strive for in this industry, because it's definitely attainable.
Yeah, so for Mirage, the choice really, when we were designing our protocol, was whether to launch an app chain. It's very popular, DYDX, Hyperliquid took this approach, or to launch on a layer 1 or layer 2. And we're a team of longtime DeFi users, and like Alex was saying, the power of DeFi comes from composability. On Mirage, you can take a yield-bearing asset like liquid staked Aptos or USDY and use that as collateral. And then from there, you can become a liquidity provider and earn yield from fees on the DEX. And that's just more capital efficient than having an app chain where you deposit, let's say, USDC, and your yield only comes from the one protocol. And then if you want to do anything else with it, you have to bridge your assets back off. So for us, it was kind of an easy choice. We thought it's just a more compelling product. And we want to offer a better experience in a centralized exchange. And the one thing a centralized exchange cannot offer is composability. Composable with other DeFi protocols. And that's really only possible on-chain, and it's really only accessible on layer 1s or layer 2s. And why did we pick Aptos specifically? Well, we picked it because it's the highest performance blockchain. The downside to launching on a permissionless, open blockchain is that everybody's sharing the same resources. So when markets get volatile, people tend to send a lot of transactions. And we've seen this on Ethereum, layer 2s, and on Solana, where the user experience degrades when a lot of users want to trade. And unfortunately for a perps DEX, this coincides with periods of volatility when we need to do liquidations, when people need to trigger the orders, or just are interested in trading to take that opportunity. And so Aptos, at the time, was scaled to the point where you could take almost any DeFi application, all the DeFi applications, put them on Aptos, and there would still be capacity to spare, even in volatile market conditions. And what's really excited us about Aptos is not where they were a year ago, it's where they've come in the last year. So in the last year, Aptos has managed to scale to 12K TPS at peak, And if it continues to kind of follow Moore's law, there's always going to be enough supply such that even in areas with times with lots of demand for block space, the fees will still be cheap, orders still get executed quickly, and the experience will still look just like a centralized exchange. And so, I mean, we've been really happy with the direction Aptos taken and our choice.
Awesome. So both Alex and Julian, you mentioned kind of beating a centralized exchange. And I honestly think one of the holy grails of blockchain is price discovery on blockchains, not actually doing it on a centralized exchange. But what we've kind of seen with layer 2s as like a single sequencer, if you only have that single sequencer, I believe that there's going to be lots of latency games played as you want to co-locate to the sequencer instead of being a globally distributed kind of node set. I would love to start the conversation really around what do you think it will ultimately take to enable price discovery on blockchains. There's many kind of different ways to do that, but Alex, maybe just kick it off. How do we get price discovery on chain?
So it is already happening in isolated instances. The one that I think I would throw out first is during the USDC DPEG, which was essentially a result of bank risk proxy. The Curve 3 pool settled billions of dollars in volume overnight on like a Saturday when like a lot of other markets are closed. And I think this was, for me, a big milestone in the industry because it marked an inflection point of a serious financial world event was happening on chain, and that was the place to be. I mean, every month, the Uniswap volumes are growing and they're competing with things like Coinbase. Often there's more exchange on DEXs for certain assets. There's also certain assets that you cannot trade. You cannot trade off-chain because the business relationships that are required to list on a centralized exchange don't necessarily apply when there's like an autonomously generated meme coin or some other financial instrument that really has just been invented in the last year or so. As far as the evolution and the exodus from off-chain order books to on-chain order books, I think that one of the premier candidates is actually Forex markets that use stablecoins as a proxy. Right now, I think a lot of countries are realizing that they can sell more debt if they mint things on blockchains and fund whatever things they want to fund with their debt. And obviously the US has these stablecoins in predominantly things like Tether, which is now going to be on Aptos, but other countries are starting to do this too. And the interesting part about stablecoins and sovereign currencies in general is that they're by definition non-jurisdictional in a Forex market because it's one country versus another, and so the only real logical place for it to trade is in a place that is not a country and has to be on the blockchain or the metaverse or whatever you want to call it. And the interesting thing too about Forex markets is that they don't have these same restrictions that you might have in commodities markets where you might have to prove you can take delivery of like barrels of corn. There's these like really hilarious cases of spec traders in New York having like all this oil or something show up and they're like, no, we're a trading house. But by virtue of a stablecoin existing on chain, it means that someone has a bank account somewhere and is willing to redeem it for you. And this means that merchants in different areas of the world can settle with each other much faster. They don't have to like have an intermediary bank where they're storing their funds and locking them up while they clear between the different banks at a time. They can settle these things almost instantly. And I think that it begins with the Forex markets, but it doesn't obviously end there. I think one of the real end games probably is going to be equities price discovery on chain. I think there's a lot of like legal hurdles and red tape and bureaucratic churn that has to happen before that. But the interesting thing is that even without some country agreeing to do a national stock exchange on chain, the market can still like beat them to it in a sense. Because if you have an Oracle and it posts the price feeds on chain, then you can open up a perps market. And as long as you have a price feed, you can actually get exposure to these things and you can trade when they might not be traded during NASDAQ hours or whatever. And so I think that this sort of forces the hand of institutions to go to 24/7 settlement. And if you can have 24/7 settlement in crypto and it's composable, it ultimately presents just a more compelling product for the end user in ensuring this atomic composability and open accessibility. So I'll leave it to you guys to follow up that.
So I want to pass it to Joshua to talk about the Oracle side, and then I want to come back to Alex and Julian to talk about some of the differences between AMMs and order books. How does bringing on-chain data into blockchain, how difficult is that? How do you keep things real time? How important is that for the entire ecosystem?
Right, so in a world of high frequency trading, right, every 10 milliseconds matters. So when you have you might even argue every millisecond matters. When you have a like centralized sequencer, right? Maybe for a layer 2 that's based in Chicago, perhaps. Well, guess what's going to happen? Everyone's going to collate, get closer to it to get their transactions in first, right? Us in Korea, we're not going to. It's going to take 100 milliseconds to reach the request. So blockchains that have a globally distributed network, right, where the node operation, especially if it's randomized, the next leader is unpredictable. That's a more fair system, because everyone has equal chance to be co-located or closer to each node. So in terms of getting Oracle data on chain, I do want to mention, I did some measurements earlier today. It appears that we can post about 300 data pairs to Aptos for less than 1 penny. 300 data pairs for like 0.008 cents. And Supra, our DOR, decentralized Oracle agreement, right? This is a very fast, secure Oracle protocol, and we're achieving 600 to 900 millisecond data full finality, right? Like full data freshness. And we can post that to Aptos, and folks can pull it or push it, but when they pull in it, it's very fresh and it's very cheap. They can just pull it all the time without breaking the bank. This is why high throughput blockchains, I'm very bullish on these things, you know. The importance of, a protocol that sources data from many sources, is resilient to singular data sources where maybe the data source is doing its best to be honest. For example, back in 2020, I do believe Coinbase was cryptographically signing the price of Bitcoin, but somehow someone got the private key and was signing the incorrect data. This private key was correct, it verified, but it wasn't centralized. It was centralized. It wasn't decentralized. Thus, whatever they fed the smart contracts, that's what the smart contracts ingested. And so it's very important to have multiple data sources. It's very important to have low latency. It's very important, very, very important to be inexpensive to post the data. We don't post our data right now to Solana. Also, this is another issue because we use threshold signatures, and verifying a threshold signature on Solana is cumbersome and it's difficult. Now, Aptos is BLS based, and they can verify our signature in a very inexpensive manner, BLS signatures. So I was very surprised. We can post our data, 300 data pairs updates under a penny. This is incredible. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people really appreciate how hard it is to bring that data on chain and how fresh it has to be to actually make that data useful. Stale data is not very useful data. It has to be real time, which really is what the chain is designed to do. Julian, I know you and Alex ultimately both are approaching price discovery and blockchains, or would love price discovery enabled on blockchains, but you guys are each taking a more differentiated approach. Can you kind of highlight how you guys are approaching price discovery on Aptos?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, our end goal is to allow users to trade anything with a price feed. And also, another trend we see is real-world assets and the explosion of different things that hold value on chain. There's collectibles, NFTs, real-world assets, real estate, and probably more things that people are building we haven't even thought of yet. And to make that work, it really doesn't work in the traditional financial system, like on a NASDAQ or a SIBO. What you have is everything is settled in USD, and you have a few, each market is very concentrated with a few sophisticated market makers like DRW. And it's not easy for anybody to participate in both the trading side, you have to go through a brokerage, or anybody participate on the liquidity provision side because you need dollars and you have to be in the United States. And so where we're innovating is we're allowing liquidity providers to provide not just USD as collateral, but Aptos, liquid staked Aptos, yield-bearing stablecoins. And this, I think, really differentiates us from a NASDAQ kind of order book-based approach where all the trades are settled in dollars, so you're really excluding a lot of people on chain. And then also on the trading side, users have to swap into USD to make trades. While they might own real estate or something, it's not possible for the average consumer to actually take that, tokenize it, and trade it. And so what we really want to do is we want to support this explosion of assets, and we want to do it in a capital efficient way without having fragmented liquidity. And so the way we do that is we have rather than order book, we have all liquidity pooled between all of our markets. And that allows us to list not just have efficient Aptos USD markets, but markets like meme coins, markets on really anything Supra can provide as an oracle. And this becomes a real problem for like the NASDAQs of the world, where to list a new asset, they have to go find a centralized market maker to go make their market. And then that liquidity might be pulled from other assets, or the market makers have to go and borrow more money. For us, because we have this shared pool of liquidity, we can list fun, less liquid assets that have maybe not as good price discovery without fragmenting any of our liquidity. And so this allows us to be super capital efficient. And right now in Aptos, this is super important because there's not actually a lot of native assets that are tradable. Mostly it's Aptos, a few native tokens, and some memes. And that's not enough. People want to trade everything. And so, out of the box, we're going to support, all the major assets people want to trade. And that's, I think, super important on a fledgling ecosystem where traders, want to be on Aptos, but they also want to trade Bitcoin, Ethereum, and meme coins on other chains.
And I think AMMs are uniquely great for that 0 to 1.
Right.
And I think it's been interesting now that high throughput is enabled. I'm excited to see how that experimentation continues to play out. I think Alex has maybe a slightly different point of view on how to enable price discovery on chain with order books. And with order books, obviously you need to set bids, cancel bids. You're doing a lot on chain. Can you talk about maybe the differences from Julian?
Yeah, totally. The AMM, I think, was a really core innovation for crypto because it allowed a market to exist and set it and forget it mode, and retail could provide liquidity in a way that wasn't ever really accessible. No one who wants to hold some asset is going to go place limit orders through their Robinhood account and check in on it every minute or whatever. It just wasn't feasible. But in an AMM with crypto, anyone could provide liquidity, and you take that and you multiply it by 10 million people who are farming incentives, and you have the most liquid markets in the world for stablecoins or what have you. And totally agreed on this idea that the AMM is the way that you bootstrap a market and start it up. And when a market becomes fully mature and it's a blue chip asset, for example, the native gas token of an L1, like APT, versus a stable coin, there is enough interest often from market makers who are going to quote these things that it's going to be tight spreads, that they're going to be able to place and cancel their asks and their bids, and there will be other market makers who are willing to give a competitive price that ultimately the aggregator flow will tend to go through those order book based ones. But again, the blue chip assets are not always the first ones that people want to trade in a new burgeoning ecosystem. But longer term, I think that we've already seen that the order book is the pillar of finance. Pretty much everything in the world that settles off chain, aside from maybe esoteric real estate markets or something, is going to be on an order book. And there's going to be sufficient liquidity there. Often, if it is traded on an exchange somewhere, there's going to be an order book for it. And I think that the core innovation that the on-chain order book offers is more access to these things. It's more transparent, and it inverts the data model. So these centralized exchanges like the NASDAQ often actually make most of their revenue off of just selling the data. So yes, they'll settle people's trades, but they do it in private. And if people want to make models about maybe other people's trading behaviors so they can adversarially trade against them, they need to pay for this. And the things that are getting built on blockchains are fundamentally inverting that model and making everyone have access to the data, and they're making it as easy as possible, which enhances participation. It makes for more efficient markets. And on the topic of the market efficiency, I think one of the unique sort of paradoxes of on-chain finance is that because of the global consensus and because of the fact that information has to travel around the world, we're getting rid of these issues of co-location that are forcing everyone around one server in Chicago or whatever.
We could spend an entire panel just on co-location, and I'm glad you called it out, because I really don't think people understand how big of an issue a single sequencer can be in the co-location issues.
Yeah, it ends up being a bidding war for real estate to see who can get the shortest Ethernet cable in some server in New York and who can pay the most for that real estate. And so there's only a handful of very like moneyed institutions that survive like often in the U.S. or New York who can afford these things, and it's inefficient. And often, like HFT trading, where you're working on like microseconds or nanoseconds, it's these institutions really just spoofing each other, and they're skimming off the top of every pension fund and every endowment or whatever, and they're not necessarily making the price of discovery any more efficient. And what blockchains do is by distributing that consensus globally, it actually forces the data model to consolidate around qualitative news events. So what matters more is not that you can predict what the other HFT firm is going to do and spoof them. What matters is that you've actually incorporated information into the price feed. You have looked at the news and you've realized that the weather just changed in this one place, and so coffee beans are going to grow in a certain way, and therefore the like Starbucks stock has some effect downstream. And if you can actually incorporate that on chain, it makes for a more meaningful and I think more practical global price discovery engine that is more focused on actually setting the price in terms of sentiment and world events than in terms of like adversarial dynamics and fighting the other people who are trading on the market. I think with sufficient liquidity and access to the market, it becomes a more fair place and ultimately a better place for anyone who's really just trying to like buy or sell something, because these market makers, they have their AI models that are scraping the sentiment, they're looking at all these things, and it's computing this price, which is this like beautiful synthesis of emotion and quantitative data, and it provides a way for us to actually value the things that we need in this world. And doing it all on chain just makes it a more like logically consolidated place, and we all know like that the internet is really the place to get these things done. We've had these tools for a long time, and it's exciting that they're actually finally getting put to use in this way.
So I'll pass it back to Julian for 1 minute,
Yep.
and then we'll do more of a rapid fire type questions to wrap it up.
I guess our view on order books is that they were kind of designed for like finance too, like kind of the old version of finance where market making is completely centralized and where everybody's trading and settling in USD. And that works really well for some highly liquid markets. But the problem becomes like when you don't want to settle in USD, I want to settle in Aptos, I want to settle in some meme coin. That's never going to be possible in an order book, because every time you add a new asset you settle in, you're fragmenting liquidity. And similarly, like to be a liquidity provider, it requires a high level of sophistication. And what it ends up looking like is a zero-sum game, a race to zero. And if you look at how NASDAQ actually operates, the only reason they're able to have hyper-efficient markets is they have actual contracts and designated market makers that receive rebates. And so there's actually a centralization element to it, where to get efficiency, what you do is you pick one actor and you have them make the book. And there are some approaches on chain to kind of avoid this, but fundamentally, AMMs have been so powerful in Uniswap, is the best example of allowing price discovery and allowing people to trade and settle in any asset they want. And we really see that as the Web3 approach. And that's like, as we get more RWAs, more assets, more things that can be priced on chain, AMMs are, I think, the approach that crypto has found as the best way to do that.
I have one thing to add. Just
go for it.
The importance of fast finality for price discovery. If you have to wait 12 minutes or technically 12 seconds for Solana for full finality, that could be an issue. I know the folks at Aptos and others are looking for sub-second finality. Supra is also looking for that in our data feeds as well. So I think fast finality is very underrated. Well, it should be discussed more in terms of price discovery.
Absolutely.
So in the last 2 minutes, I would like to kind of go like rapid fire questions. Maybe in perhaps one sentence, each of you, why Aptos?
For me, it's safer and it's fast, high throughput. Its move language is, in my opinion, it may take a decade or two, but it will eventually be the predominant language.
Alex?
Atomic composability at the speed of light.
For us, it's just performance. The efficiency of a perp stacks is based on the efficiency of execution and settlement, and Aptos is the most efficient, fastest blockchain, and so that's why we're there.
What is a strongly held belief that you believe that others do not?
Well, I think that vertical integration of the full stack is the end game for blockchain.
That throughput matters, and if it's not fast, it's not going to make it.
I think the opinion I have is I think performance matters. Maybe it's not controversial, but Aptos' focus on performance, I think, is the right focus, and to build a compelling product, you have to be better than everyone else, and that's what Aptos is. I mean, Aptos is the best, most performant L1. People might not like that, but that's the truth.
I do want to just say that when I say full vertical integration, that's the exact opposite of the modular thesis.
So bearish,
Very bearish
modularity.
modular.
Last round. What is your pitch? 1 minute, or not 1 minute, 1 sentence to have others come build this and check it out.
Okay, full vertical integration, single blockchain that has price feeds, cross-chain communication, automation, on-chain randomness all in one is going to enable new applications we call super dApps.
Everything we build is open source. It has tutorials, and multiple teams have already integrated with it.
Yeah, I mean, Mirage is just going to be the best place to trade, and it's going to be the best place to put your liquidity. So we want to see people with liquidity put it on a Mirage, and anybody who has an opinion, wants to trade, thinks they know where price is going, please do it on Mirage.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you to the Aptos team for hosting this event. Really look forward to the rest of the talks.